I woke up on my 40th birthday to an emptiness that hit harder than I expected. No balloons, no card, no excited happy birthday from my kids. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt like a warning, not a gift. I figured Caleb was just running late. He always had a tendency to do that. But when I checked the time, I saw that hours had passed and still nothing. My phone buzzed. Instagram notifications flooded in, and that's when it hit me. The picture, Caleb, smiling ear to ear, surrounded by the kids, standing in front of some luxurious hotel in Dubai. The caption, "Daddy's treating us since Mom's boring anyway." I stared at the screen, frozen. I was nothing to him, just an afterthought. The betrayal was so blatant, so public, that I could barely comprehend it. He didn't just forget my birthday. He took my kids, my family, and left me here, all without even telling me where they were going. She planned it all, didn't she? Vanessa, his young assistant. I didn't need to be a genius to know what was going on. I felt my heart sink. This wasn't just a vacation. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. The truth came out, and with it, the realization that I had been nothing more than a placeholder in his life. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overreacting. But as the hours passed, the pit in my stomach grew. I was deceived. How could I have been so blind? How had I missed the signs? There were so many moments, so many little things that I now realized had been clues to the truth. Caleb had been growing distant for months, but I made excuses for him. Work stress, family obligations. But this was unforgivable. I could almost hear him in my mind saying he thought I would stay, as though I would be content to wait around forever while he ran off to live the life he wanted. My phone buzzed again. More messages. One from my best friend, asking if I was okay. She must have seen the picture too. When she was captured by the truth of it all, I couldn't even pretend anymore. I wasn't okay. I was devastated. But the worst part was realizing that he didn't even care to hide it. He exposed me, on my own birthday no less. He showed me without a doubt that I was nothing, and I was left to piece together the aftermath on my own. I walked through the house, the silence still ringing in my ears. It felt like a different place now, empty in more ways than one. I could still hear the laughter from days before, but now it felt so distant. The house felt cold, like a stranger's home. I went to the kitchen, my eyes landing on the untouched birthday cake I had bought myself. She cried in silence, I thought, remembering how many nights I'd cried quietly, hoping for something to change, but nothing ever did. Now, it felt like the last act of a play that had been over for years, and I hadn't even realized it. I found myself staring at the screen again, the image of Caleb's family in Dubai mocking me, and that's when I knew what I had to do. No more silence. No more waiting for him to come back and beg me to forgive him. I was done. My silence was my answer. I didn't need to wait around for an apology that would never come. He broke me first, but I was ready to break free. The next move was mine. The day dragged on, my mind racing. I needed clarity, but all I could think about was revenge. Not in the sense of hurting him, but in the sense of reclaiming myself. I knew that I could get the evidence I needed. Caleb's arrogance would be his undoing. All I had to do was get my hands on his private messages, his credit card statements, and when I did, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly who he really was. The thought of him, in the lap of luxury, enjoying his trip with Vanessa and the kids, made my blood boil. But I knew I couldn't let anger dictate my next steps. I had to be smarter. I had to make sure that when I exposed him, it wasn't just a moment of petty revenge. It had to be his reckoning. It had to be his downfall. And so, I took a deep breath, turned off my phone, and started making my plan. I would rebuild my life. But first, I needed the truth. And that truth, I would expose it all. He never saw it coming. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The picture in Dubai was only the beginning. I spent the next few hours digging, pulling at threads that I hoped would lead me to something. The texts, the phone calls, the things I hadn't seen before. At first, I was hesitant. Was I really ready to uncover more of his lies? But then I thought about how many times I'd ignored my gut, how many excuses I'd made for him. No more. I wasn't going to live in denial anymore. It was time to face the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I started with the credit card statements. Caleb had always been the one to handle the bills, the one to tell me everything was fine. Even when I could see the financial strain, I'd never questioned it, never wondered what was really going on behind the scenes. But today, I was on a mission. I pulled up the latest statements, my fingers trembling slightly as I scrolled through them, and then I saw it. A series of charges, expensive restaurants, luxury shopping sprees, hotel bookings, all in the name of business trips he'd never mentioned. There it was, a pattern, and each charge felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't sure how to process what I was seeing. Betrayal. It hit me like a wave. Caleb had been using his work trips as an excuse for his affair, but that wasn't the worst of it. As I kept digging, I found something that made my heart drop. A burner phone, hidden in his desk drawer. I hadn't even known it existed. And, as I picked it up, I saw the messages. His assistant, Vanessa, there she was, sending explicit texts, sharing intimate details, laughing at how they'd been fooling me all along. I found the messages. I couldn't stop reading them. Each word felt like a dagger to my heart. They'd been playing me for months, and I never even suspected. The worst part? He had the audacity to plan this all out, just like he planned the Dubai trip. She planned it all, didn't she? Vanessa, the girl he'd brought into our lives under the guise of helping with business. And there it was, in black and white. He'd betrayed me. He'd betrayed everything we built together. I felt so stupid for not seeing it sooner, for trusting him blindly, for thinking he would never do something like this. But I couldn't dwell on that now. I had to focus. I had the proof. I had everything I needed to expose him for what he was. I stared at the phone, wondering how much longer I could keep playing the role of the oblivious wife. My heart was racing, and for a moment, I felt so small. But then I realized no one could make me feel small anymore. Not Caleb, not Vanessa. I wasn't the victim here. I wasn't the one who was weak. It was them. They were the ones who thought they could deceive me, think they could steal my life without consequences. But that wasn't how this was going to end. I picked up my phone, ready to make my next move. But before I did, I remembered something. Caleb always used to say how he was untouchable, how he'd always have the upper hand because of his status, his wealth, his connections. Well, guess what? I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. I had a different kind of power now. The truth was mine, and it was the one thing he couldn't escape. As I opened my laptop to draft the email that would change everything, I thought about the future. I was no longer afraid of him. He never saw it coming, and that was the beauty of it all. He thought I'd be too devastated to do anything, too broken to fight back. But I wasn't broken. I was stronger than I'd ever been. I hit send, and with that single action, everything began to shift. I leaned back in my chair, breathing deeply. The truth had come out. Caleb's world was about to crumble, and I was going to be the one to make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. He might have thought I was just some wife at home, too naive to notice what was going on. But now, he would know that I wasn't just any wife. I was a woman who knew her worth, and nothing, no one, was going to take that away from me. I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything Caleb had done. He'd crossed a line, one I couldn't ignore. For years I'd played the role of the supportive wife, the one who always had his back. But now, all I could feel was a seething rage beneath the surface. The need to fight back, to make him realize just how much power I still had. I might have been hurt, but I wasn't weak. And I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I thought about all the connections I had. I wasn't just some clueless housewife. I had a brain. I had skills. I had spent years working in law, and it was time to put that to use. Caleb had always thought of himself as untouchable, but he'd forgotten something. The law was something he couldn't outrun, no matter how high he climbed or how many people he had in his pocket. So, I called in a favor. It wasn't long before. I had access to security footage from his office, the same office where so many of his lies had been born. The camera footage didn't lie. I watched it frame by frame, each moment a revelation. Caleb and Vanessa, there they were, working late into the night, whispering to each other like they were some kind of partners in crime. They didn't even try to hide it. In the footage, Vanessa was practically sitting on his lap. Their chemistry, so blatant it was almost sickening. And that wasn't even the worst part. As I continued to watch, I saw Caleb pulling out company documents, swiping his credit card to cover up his tracks, and making shady phone calls that I knew were illegal. He wasn't just having an affair. He was embezzling. He was using the company's funds for his personal indulgence, and I had the proof to take him down. This wasn't just betrayal. It was criminal, and I was going to make sure he paid for it. I knew what I had to do next. My mind was racing as I compiled everything, every screenshot, every email, every piece of evidence I could find. It was a tight case, airtight even, and I knew I had to make the move at the right moment. I wasn't just going to expose him to me. I was going to expose him to the world, his business, his career, his reputation. They'd all come crashing down around him, and there would be no way out. As I sat there drafting my email, I thought about Caleb's smug face, the way he'd always acted like he had everything under control. He thought I would stay. He thought I would be the one to beg him for forgiveness, to roll over and take whatever he threw at me. Well, that wasn't going to happen. It was time to take control back, and I was going to do it in the most professional, strategic way possible. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused. I was calculated, and I was ready. I composed the perfect email, professional, concise, and devastating. I attached all the evidence, every piece of information that would seal his fate. I sent it to the board of his company and the managing partner, and then I sat back, watching the seconds tick by. I could already imagine the chaos unfolding on the other side of that email. Caleb was about to lose everything. I wasn't just taking him down. I was exposing his whole house of cards. I didn't wait long. Less than an hour later, I got the call from the law firm. Caleb had been escorted out. His access to the company's systems had been locked. His career was over. He never saw it coming. He had no idea that all of his lies, his manipulation, had been caught on camera. All the things he thought he could get away with were now public knowledge. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, but more than that, I felt empowered. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I wasn't just the wife who'd been betrayed. I was the woman who had taken control, who had turned the tables and showed him exactly what happens when you think you can get away with everything. The truth was out, and now Caleb would have to face the consequences of his actions. Sending that email was the first step, but the real satisfaction came when I saw Caleb's life start to unravel before my eyes. There's something almost poetic about it. The man who once believed he could walk all over me was now a man scrambling to keep his grip on everything he thought he owned. Watching him lose control was bittersweet. As much as I wanted to feel sorry for him, I couldn't. This was his doing. He built this house of cards, and now it was crashing down. I'll never forget that moment when I received the confirmation that the board had seen the email. Caleb's firm didn't waste any time. His reputation had been compromised, and the very people who had once called him a genius were now calling him a criminal. I knew his world was falling apart, but even then, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was this really the best thing for the kids? I had to remind myself that what I was doing wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about holding Caleb accountable for everything he'd done. In the midst of all this chaos, I couldn't help but reflect on the years I'd spent bending over backward for him. The countless hours, the sacrifices, the way I'd put him and our family first. I was nothing to him in the end. That was the most painful part of all. I had given everything, and he had repaid me with lies, deceit, and an affair. But I refused to let that define me anymore. It didn't matter if he had betrayed me. He betrayed me, not my worth. By the time Caleb called me, I knew exactly what he was going to say. He was begging, just like I knew he would. His voice was frantic, a complete contrast to the calm arrogance he'd always had. He pleaded with me to take him back, to forgive him, to give him another chance. He begged me to come back. But this wasn't a fairy tale, and I wasn't some naive woman who could just sweep everything under the rug. His words fell on deaf ears. I wasn't interested in his excuses anymore. He wanted me to believe that this was all just a misunderstanding, that Vanessa didn't mean anything to him, that he was still the man I married, just a little lost. But I wasn't buying it. I had seen the messages, the pictures, the late-night conversations. The truth had come out, and there was no going back. No amount of pleading could undo the damage he had done. The truth was there, laid out in black and white, and nothing would change that. I wasn't going to play the victim. I wasn't going to fall for the lies. As I sat there, I realized how much power I had gained in such a short time. The calmness I felt wasn't just from my strategic move. It was from something deeper. It was from the realization that I had taken control of my own life. I wasn't a woman waiting for someone to fix things for me. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my worth. And I wasn't going to allow Caleb's actions to break me any further. My silence was my answer. He wanted me to respond, to be angry, to be emotional, but I didn't owe him that. The kids were coming back soon, and while I knew I had to be careful with how I explained everything to them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about Caleb. It was about rebuilding my life, showing my kids that they didn't have to stay in a relationship where betrayal was the norm. They didn't have to accept this as their reality. They were going to see what real strength looked like. It was time to prepare for what was coming next. Caleb would come home, and things would never be the same again. When he did, I was ready. I would confront him, but I wasn't going to scream or shout. I wasn't going to beg him for anything. I would simply stand there and tell him the truth that she planned it all, the truth that I wasn't going to tolerate his behavior anymore. I could already feel the change inside me, the shift in my energy. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal. Caleb's betrayal had affected me deeply, but it was also the catalyst for my own transformation. I had learned the power of standing up for myself, of not waiting for anyone to save me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something crucial. I wasn't afraid of what was coming. I was prepared. As I waited for Caleb's return, I couldn't help but smile to myself. He never saw it coming. The man who had underestimated me for so long was now walking into a world where I was the one in control, and it felt damn good. It's strange how quickly things can change. One moment, I was living a life I thought I understood, and the next, everything felt different. Caleb was gone, and I was left with this overwhelming sense of power that I had never felt before. It wasn't about the material things. It was about the control I had over my own destiny. The house was mine, the kids were mine, and Caleb, well, he didn't have a place here anymore. Changing the locks felt like the ultimate act of freedom. There was something so final about it, like I was closing a chapter of my life that had no place in my future. I knew Caleb would hate it, But that wasn't my problem anymore. He thought I would stay, just like always. He thought that no matter what he did, I would be the one waiting at home for him, arms wide open. But no, not this time. This time, I was the one closing the door. The kids were at first confused when I told them about the locks. I could see the worry in their eyes, the way they looked back and forth between me and the door, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was their mother, and they needed to see me stand firm. They needed to know that even though their world was changing, there was one thing that would never change: my love for them and my commitment to their well-being. I would not let them live in a house where deceit and betrayal had been allowed to thrive. The joint accounts? Frozen. Another act of power, another move I had control over. Caleb would not have access to the money anymore. He couldn't just waltz in and take what he thought was his. The money was mine now, and with it, I could make sure that my kids and I were secure. I had to protect them, not just emotionally, but financially too. I was taking back every ounce of control I could, and it felt like a huge weight lifting off my shoulders. I couldn't help but think of all the times Caleb had thought he had the upper hand. The times he belittled me, treated me like I was nothing. I was nothing to him, just a woman he could discard when he felt like it. I had been a side character in his story, never the lead. But now, I was the one calling the shots. I was the one deciding what happened next, not him. He might have thought I'd collapse under the weight of his betrayal, but I was stronger than he could ever imagine. When Caleb finally showed up at the door, I was ready. I stood there, facing him with my head held high. He looked so different from the man I had once married. He was frantic, disheveled, like someone who had lost everything. But I wasn't moved by his desperation. I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He begged me to come back. He was looking for forgiveness, looking for an easy way out. But there was no easy way out this time. There was no coming back. I watched him, almost feeling sorry for him, but that feeling passed quickly. I couldn't afford to be weak anymore. The kids were there, watching everything unfold, and this moment, this confrontation, wasn't just for me, it was for them too. I needed them to see me stand tall. I needed them to understand that betrayal is never acceptable, no matter who it comes from. As Caleb tried to plead his case, I interrupted him. I wasn't interested in his excuses. I wasn't interested in hearing how sorry he was. The truth had already come out, and nothing he said could change that. I wasn't going to let him rewrite this story. It wasn't his to tell anymore. I had the proof. I had the evidence, and I was done. I could see the anger rising in him, but I wasn't intimidated. This wasn't the man I had once loved. This was a broken version of him, a man who had thrown everything away for a quick thrill. I had no pity for him. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Caleb's eyes searched mine for some sign of weakness, some sign that I might relent, but there was nothing there. My silence was my answer. I wasn't going to engage in his emotional games anymore. I had learned the hard way that words were meaningless. It was actions that mattered, and my actions spoke louder than anything he could say. As Caleb left, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The house was mine, the kids were mine, and most importantly, I was mine. I had taken back my power, and there was no going back. Filing for divorce was never something I imagined doing. It felt like I was stepping into unknown territory, yet somehow, it also felt like the only choice left. For years, I had tried to make it work. I had bent over backward to be the wife Caleb wanted, to be the mother our kids needed. But when the truth came out, when the betrayal was laid bare before me, there was no going back. There was no pretending that everything was fine anymore. I had learned to read Caleb's moods like a book. I knew when he was lying. I knew when he was trying to pull one over on me. And the thing that hurt the most? I realized he had been doing it for months, maybe even years. The deception was deep. He broke me first, but it wasn't just the affair. It was the years of pretending, the years of thinking I was crazy for questioning his loyalty. I had been living in a fog of doubt for so long, but once everything was out in the open, it was like a light bulb turned on. I saw everything for what it was. I didn't want to be bitter, but I also couldn't pretend that Caleb deserved anything but the consequences of his actions. The lies, the manipulation, it all had to be accounted for, and I was the one who had to make sure it was. Divorce wasn't just about splitting assets. It was about reclaiming my life, taking back the pieces of myself that Caleb had chipped away at for years. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this scot-free, so I dove in. I wasn't about to let him drag me through a messy, emotional battle. I had one goal, to make sure I walked away with what was mine, everything I had worked for, everything I had built. Caleb might have thought he could outsmart me, but I wasn't the same woman he had married. I was smarter now. I was stronger. I was ready. With the help of my lawyer, we gathered everything: emails, bank statements, text messages, and all the evidence that would prove Caleb had been hiding money and mismanaging assets. I knew the prenup inside and out. but I also knew that Caleb had violated its terms in ways that would cost him dearly. This wasn't just about winning the divorce. It was about making sure Caleb couldn't use me as his personal doormat anymore. The day we went to court, my heart was calm. It wasn't about getting revenge. It was about getting what I deserved. I had spent too long being quiet, being the good wife, pretending that everything was fine. But now I was going to make sure Caleb knew exactly how much damage he had done. He thought I would stay and keep pretending, but no. This was the end. When the judge heard the evidence, I could see Caleb's face shift. It was like he was finally realizing that the games were over. He never saw it coming. His lawyer tried to fight, tried to discredit the evidence, but it was too late. The truth had come out, and as much as Caleb wanted to deny it, there was no escaping what he had done. It wasn't just the affair that was on the line. It was everything he had built on lies, every deceitful move he had made to take advantage of me, of us. I could see the realization in his eyes as the judge handed down the decision. Caleb was going to lose far more than he had bargained for. His assets were frozen, his reputation tarnished, and his control over our shared life was slipping away. And I was walking away with what I had earned. I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was done being afraid. The moment Caleb thought he could take everything from me, he had underestimated me. So I showed him the proof, and in doing so, I showed myself that I was capable of far more than I had ever given myself credit for. I wasn't just fighting for a divorce. I was fighting for my future, my peace, and my children's safety. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about winning. I was just relieved that it was over. Caleb didn't get to write the ending of our story. I was the one who got to decide how this chapter would close. It's strange how pain can shape you, mold you into someone unrecognizable, but also into someone incredibly strong. When Caleb and I finally separated, I didn't know what my life would look like. It felt like everything I had known was slipping through my fingers. But at the same time, I had this sense of quiet determination. I was done letting fear control my decisions. This was my chance to rebuild, and I wasn't going to waste it. The first thing I did was take a step back. I needed to reconnect with myself, find out who I was without the label of wife or mother that had defined me for so long. I started by doing things I had put off for years. I joined a yoga class. I began reading books that didn't have anything to do with raising kids or keeping a house in order, and I even started painting again, something I used to love before life got so complicated. At first, it was awkward. It felt like I had forgotten how to be me, but as the weeks went on, something changed. I wasn't just filling up time with distractions. I was rediscovering my passion, my creativity, the parts of me that I had buried deep. She finally left, the woman who had been so consumed with Caleb's needs, with everyone else's needs. And in her place, there was a version of me that had been hiding for far too long. I also started therapy. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed to confront the emotional damage, the things I had allowed myself to tolerate for too long. It was tough facing my own vulnerabilities, but there was something incredibly freeing about it. It wasn't just about healing from Caleb's betrayal. It was about healing from the belief that I didn't deserve better. The truth was, I had been deceived by my own fear. I was letting it dictate my choices, but no more. Slowly, I began to see things differently. The pain of the betrayal didn't define me anymore. I realized that in the midst of all the hurt, I had grown stronger. And it wasn't just emotional growth. I started to take better care of myself, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I began to eat healthier, exercise, and invest in my mental well-being. It wasn't about looking a certain way or meeting someone's expectations. It was about reclaiming control over my own life. Through it all, I began to see the power of forgiveness, not for Caleb, but for me. I wasn't going to let resentment hold me hostage anymore. I still loved my children deeply, and they were struggling with the changes, but I knew I had to be the example for them. I couldn't teach them about resilience if I didn't embody it myself. I wanted them to see that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. Then there was the moment when I looked in the mirror and didn't just see the broken woman who had been betrayed. I saw someone who had endured, who had survived. My silence was my answer. I had spent so much time crying in silence, suffering in silence. But now I had something different to say. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about my rebirth, my strength. I had been through hell, but I was no longer that woman. I had found the messages, and in doing so, I had found something much more valuable, my self-worth. The pain had cracked me open, but it had also let the light in. I wasn't going to go back to who I was. I couldn't. I had come too far. And in the quiet moments of reflection, I started to realize something. I wasn't just getting through this. I was coming out of it stronger, more determined, more focused on what mattered. I didn't need Caleb's approval. I didn't need anyone's validation. I had exposed him, not to punish him, but to free myself. And now, I was free to create a new life. As the weeks passed, I could feel the shift within me. The transformation was real. It wasn't instantaneous, but it was steady. I was learning to trust myself again, learning to take chances and leap forward without looking back. And as I moved through this new chapter, I realized that the best was yet to come. It wasn't just about healing personally. I needed to reclaim my professional life too. It had been years since I had truly felt valued outside of my role as a wife and mother. And now, with the divorce behind me, I saw a clear path ahead. One where I could stand on my own 2 feet, professionally and financially. I wasn't going to let Caleb's actions define my worth anymore. When Sullivan and Pierce reached out, offering me a role leading their ethics compliance division, I didn't hesitate. I knew it was a big step, but I also knew I had earned it. This wasn't just about getting back at Caleb. It was about proving to myself that I could still thrive. I didn't need his approval, his connections, or his name attached to mine. This was my moment to shine on my own. The first day was nerve-wracking, to say the least. I was stepping into a world I had left behind when I became a full-time mother. I had spent so many years prioritizing Caleb, my kids, the house. It felt like I had forgotten who I was in that world. But as I walked into that conference room, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just a woman recovering from betrayal. I was a woman reclaiming her life. The work was challenging, yes, but it also reminded me of the strength I had forgotten I had. Each day, I met people who respected my knowledge and experience. The tasks were demanding, but I welcomed them. I wasn't the same woman who had been silent for too long. I had shown Caleb the proof of his lies. Now, I was showing the world the proof of my abilities. There were moments, though, when the old insecurities crept in. He thought I would stay. Caleb had assumed I would always be his support system, that I would always stay in the background. And for a long time, I had. But now, I was in the driver's seat of my own life. I was learning to make decisions based on what I wanted, not what anyone else expected. It wasn't long before my work started getting noticed. The company began to see my value not just as a leader, but as a person who had experienced life's darkest moments and still came out stronger. My colleagues respected me, and more importantly, I respected myself. It wasn't about proving Caleb wrong. It was about proving that I was capable of handling this new chapter. I was no longer defined by what he had done to me. One of the hardest things was walking into meetings without the weight of my past dragging me down. I used to think I couldn't carry both my personal life and my professional goals simultaneously, but here I was, doing exactly that. I was learning how to compartmentalize, how to be present in each moment. I couldn't let my past dictate my future. He never saw it coming. He thought I would fold, but instead, I built an entirely new foundation. And the most rewarding part? Seeing how my children responded. They were watching me, and I could see how much they admired my strength. They had seen me cry, seen me struggle, but now they saw me rise. I wasn't just their mother anymore. I was a woman who was taking control of her life, and that was a lesson I would continue to teach them. I wasn't just getting by anymore. I was thriving. And with every success, I felt a bit more confident, a bit more secure in who I had become. It was strange to think back on who I was a year ago. She cried in silence, but now I was speaking up for myself. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was rebuilding my identity. And with every new victory, I could feel the old wounds healing. The truth had come out. Caleb's betrayal had been devastating, but it also propelled me into something better. A life where I didn't need to rely on anyone else to define me. I could do this on my own, and I was going to show the world exactly what I was made of. It was a year later, on my 41st birthday, that I truly understood what it meant to be reborn. The woman I had been on my 40th birthday, broken, abandoned, and deceived, was nothing like the woman I had become. I looked around at the faces of the people who surrounded me, my children, my friends, and the new people I had come to trust, and I realized how far I had come. I was no longer defined by the betrayal. I was defined by my resilience, my strength, and my love for myself. That morning, my daughter came running up to me with a handmade card she had made herself. It read, "Mom's Rebirth," in big, bold letters. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had been through so much with me, but now she saw a mother who was whole again. I wasn't just surviving, I was living, and I was living for myself. The celebration wasn't extravagant. It wasn't about lavish gifts or grand gestures. It was about the small moments. My friends laughing around the table, my children excited to share their homemade decorations. They had transformed our home into a sanctuary of love. There were no more secrets, no more lies, just an overwhelming sense of belonging, of knowing that I was finally where I was meant to be. In the past, I had equated birthdays with what others could give me. I had been so focused on what Caleb thought of me, what others expected of me. But this birthday was different. I didn't need anyone to validate me anymore. I had done that for myself. And as I looked around the room at the people who truly mattered, I realized I was surrounded by love, authentic, genuine love. Not the kind that was built on lies, but the kind that was built on truth. There was a quiet confidence in my heart as I blew out the candles. I didn't wish for anything. I already had everything I needed: peace, self-worth, and the knowledge that I had the strength to handle whatever life threw at me. It wasn't about getting back at Caleb or seeking revenge. It was about understanding that the best revenge was living well, living authentically, and living without fear. My children had started to heal too. The past year had been tough on them, but they were starting to see the woman I had become, and they were proud of me. The healing wasn't instant, but it was there. We were growing together, and that was something I cherished. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about creating a new family dynamic, one that was based on love and mutual respect, not betrayal and fear. The journey to this place hadn't been easy. He broke me first, but I had rebuilt myself stronger than before. She cried in silence. I had cried in silence for so long, but now my voice was strong. I had learned that silence wasn't weakness. It was the strength to walk away when you didn't need to explain yourself. And that was the lesson I had passed on to my children, the power to reclaim your own narrative. As the evening went on, I sat back and took in the moment. I had gone from being a woman who had been left behind to a woman who was in control of her destiny. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I had risen. I had found my purpose, my strength, and my place in the world. The most powerful part of that night, however, was when I looked at my reflection, not in vanity, but in acknowledgement. I had changed. I had grown. I had learned to love myself. And as I smiled, I knew that the best was yet to come. I had no idea what the future would hold, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. In that moment, I understood. The last year had been about rebuilding, yes, but it had also been about accepting who I had been, who I was, and who I would become. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was a woman who had overcome it. And that, in itself, was a victory worth celebrating.